Often, the source of our suffering is not within us, but around us. And worse, it disguises itself as normalcy. It's the subtly sarcastic coworker, the controlling mother who calls it love, the friend who constantly undermines you in public with harmless jokes. Such relationships do not scream, do not hit. They suffocate in silence. And while the mind tries to rationalize, justify, or even ignore, the body registers every microaggression. And one day, it screams. According to Gabor Maté, author of the book When the Body Says No, the emotional environment we are exposed to has a profound and often devastating impact on our health. It's not just about direct stress, but about repetitive and invisible patterns of invalidation, manipulation, and hostility that over time transform into real illnesses. The body does not differentiate between a physical attack and a constant atmosphere of emotional oppression. It reacts through chronic pain, unexplained fatigue, decreased immunity, autoimmune diseases, anxiety, or depression. This video is a warning about an uncomfortable truth. Many people live surrounded by toxic influences that sabotage their physical and emotional health, without them realizing it. They learn to call normal what is destroying their psychological integrity. Often, it's not about a single villain, but an entire relational system, at work, in the family, in social circles, that daily reinforces that their feelings are exaggerated, that their pain is trivial, that their boundaries are selfish. Gabor Maté shows, with clinical and scientific evidence, that emotional repression does not arise spontaneously. It is an adaptation. And the environment around, especially when marked by emotional neglect, unbalanced demands, and lack of support, forces this repression as a survival mechanism. But what helps to survive in the short term destroys in the long run. This video will present the 7 most common behaviors that closed people exhibit when they are, consciously or unconsciously, contributing to your stagnation, your illness, and your disconnection from your own self. You may not recognize these behaviors at first glance, but your body does. And if you have been feeling that something is wrong, even when it seems that everything is fine, it may be time to pay closer attention to who is really around you. Because before the body says no, it tries to warn. The question remains whether you are ready to listen. Attack does not always come in the form of screams or direct insults. Often it wears the mask of concern. When someone constantly minimizes your emotions with phrases like, "You're overreacting," "It's nothing," or "There are people going through much worse," what is happening is not care. It is emotional invalidation. This behavior, common in homes, friendships, and even professional relationships, creates a suffocating psychological environment where expressing vulnerability becomes a risk. Gabor Maté argues that when our emotions are repeatedly dismissed, we learn to bury them. The silent message is clear. Feeling is inappropriate. Showing pain is weakness. And so, the individual begins to distance themselves from themselves, repressing legitimate feelings to fit into the environment. However, emotions do not disappear. They lodge in the body. Over time, this constant repression can manifest as recurring migraines, gastric disorders, hypertension, or autoimmune diseases. The body, unable to continue pretending that everything is fine, begins to react physically. This invalidation also weakens self-esteem. When your emotional reactions are constantly devalued, you start to doubt your own perception of reality. A chronic feeling of inadequacy arises, as if you are always wrong for feeling what you feel. This emotional imbalance leaves the person vulnerable to even more toxic relationships, where they become increasingly dependent on external validation, something that never comes. And the most insidious part, many of these behaviors are perpetuated by close people who believe they are helping. a parent who invalidates their child's tears to toughen them up, a partner who ignores their companion's sadness because she is always sensitive. The intention may not be malicious, but the impact is devastating. The environment becomes a place where emotional truth has no space, and where the mind learns that silence is best. But silence comes at a cost, and it is even higher when the surrounding environment demands that you are always emotionally available for others, but never for yourself. And this is exactly what we will talk about in the next part. If this content is making sense to you, click the subscribe button and subscribe to the channel. Thank you for your support. In many relationships, there is a silent yet extremely destructive pattern: the constant demand for emotional support without reciprocity. You become everyone's safe harbor, but when you need shelter, you find closed doors. People who are surrounded by family, colleagues, or friends who always have a new drama, an urgent problem, or an existential crisis, but who disappear the moment you try to express your own pain, are being emotionally drained. This type of bond turns you into an emotional receptacle. The dynamic is clear: you listen, support, console, solve. But no one asks how you are. And over time, this becomes the norm. You start to feel guilty for having needs, and even ashamed for asking for help. After all, everyone around you seems to believe that you are strong, available, always ready. And this repeatedly imposed expectation becomes a prison. Gabor Maté warns that this type of one-sided relationship not only exhausts the psyche, but undermines the integrity of the body. The constant denial of one's own emotional needs creates a state of chronic stress, where the nervous system never finds rest. The physiological response is devastating: inexplicable fatigue, insomnia, low immunity, a feeling of always being on the brink of something, even when nothing concrete is happening. The body, deprived of care and attention, begins to fail. This emotional exhaustion, paradoxically, does not come only from overload, but from a lack of nourishment. When no one cares to know how you feel, your existence becomes functional. You serve everyone, but are not nourished by anyone. This reflects in a constant feeling of emptiness, disconnection, and loneliness surrounded by people. And the most dangerous part, this pattern is often reinforced by praise. You are called strong, resilient, incredible. But behind these labels lies a hidden demand: keep enduring everything without complaint. Keep being invulnerable. Keep silent. But there is a limit. And when that limit is crossed, many seek to assert their emotional autonomy. However, to do so, they must confront something even deeper: the disguised control of care. And it is about this often invisible control that we will talk next. Not all control comes with shouting or direct orders. Sometimes it manifests in affectionate gestures, concerned advice, or subtle comments that, deep down, have a single goal: to shape your choices so that you continue to serve someone else's interests. This is emotional control disguised as affection, one of the most dangerous forms of relational toxicity, because it is hard to identify and even harder to confront. Imagine a parent who, upon seeing their child straying from a traditional path, says, "I just want the best for you, but you are throwing your life away." Or a friend who, upon learning that you are considering a career change, says with a smile, "Wow, brave of you. I wouldn't have the courage to give everything up like that, especially with so many people unemployed." These are phrases loaded with hidden judgment, designed to generate doubt, insecurity, and above all, submission. Gabor Maté describes how controlling environments, even when subtle, disable an individual's autonomy and impose a permanent state of emotional vigilance. You start to censor yourself before making decisions, anticipating others' reactions. You question your own intuition. You ask for permission to live your own life. This constant vigilance feeds physiological stress, as the body understands that it is always at risk of rejection, criticism, or disguised punishment. Over time, this type of environment generates clear symptoms: anxiety when making decisions, a sense of paralysis in the face of important choices, persistent guilt when prioritizing oneself. The mind becomes a hostage to the fear of disappointing others, and the body responds with muscle pain, constant tension, nausea, digestive problems, and a fatigue that doesn't go away even with rest. Because it is not the body that is tired. It is the soul, the authentic self, that is trapped. The cruelest part is that these manipulations often come from close people who claim to care. And this makes liberation even more difficult, as you fear being seen as ungrateful, rebellious, or selfish for simply wanting to live according to your own values. But as long as you continue to yield to this control, you will be living a life that is not yours. And every step you try to take toward your truth will be sabotaged, not only by others' words, but by the invisible atmosphere of distrust and contempt. And it is precisely this sabotage, silent, constant, and corrosive, that we will explore in the next part. There is a form of psychological violence that is rarely named, but silently corrodes self-confidence: the emotional sabotage of your achievements. It does not manifest in direct attacks or open criticism, but in reactions that drain your joy, undermine your motivation, and plant doubts where there should be celebration. When you share a victory and receive an uncomfortable silence, a cutting remark, or a forced smile in response, what is happening there is not neutrality. It is disguised denial. These reactions are especially harmful because they come from close people: family, longtime friends, partners, colleagues. These are people who are supposed to cheer for you, but for unconscious reasons or not, interpret your growth as a threat. And to maintain the balance of the dynamic that favors them, they use subtle mechanisms to belittle you. They distort your achievements as luck, question your abilities with phrases like, "Can you handle it?" or remind you of past failures at the exact moment you are trying to take a step forward. Gabor Maté highlights that emotionally hostile environments to authenticity and individual growth generate chronic states of stress. When your victories are met with coldness or irony, your nervous system interprets this as rejection. The consequence is not just momentary sadness, but the creation of a pattern of self-annihilation. The individual begins to associate achievement with loneliness. They implicitly learn that standing out is dangerous, that shining attracts criticism, and that growing too much can mean losing emotional bonds. This type of conditioning generates symptoms that go far beyond the emotional. Many people living in such environments begin to develop anticipatory anxiety, insomnia before important events, chronic headaches, or even autoimmune manifestations. The body reacts as if each advance were a life-threatening risk, because in a way it is. Advancing can mean losing belonging to that circle which, even toxic, is still familiar. And the most perverse thing is that this sabotage is almost always denied. When you try to confront these people, you hear responses like, "Oh, come on, it's a joke. Stop thinking so highly of yourself," or "You've been very sensitive lately." This denial creates a cycle of emotional confusion, where the victim begins to doubt their own perception. Doubt sets in. Am I exaggerating? Is the problem me? No, the problem is not you. The problem is living surrounded by people who cannot stand to see you free, because that forces them to confront their own stagnation. They cannot bear your evolution because it exposes the areas of their lives that are stuck. And to maintain the status quo, they will do everything to keep you where you are, small, contained, silent. But keeping you small is not enough. Some of these people want to control who you connect with, and they do this by trying to emotionally isolate you from those who could strengthen you. In the next part, we will expose this trap of induced isolation, and how it compromises your emotional health on deep levels. If what you're hearing resonates with you, you'll find real value in my ebooks. Beyond the Shadow breaks down Jung's core ideas, while Dialogues with the Unconscious gives you a 30-day path to apply them in your life. Both are linked in the pinned comment. One of the most subtle and destructive forms of emotional control is induced isolation. Unlike voluntary withdrawal, the kind we seek to reflect or rest, the isolation we are talking about here is imposed, silently built through comments, judgments, and manipulations that undermine your social connections until, without realizing it, you find yourself emotionally alone, even when surrounded by people. This pattern begins almost imperceptibly. Close people make critical remarks about your friends. Have you noticed how so-and-so only reaches out to you when they need something? Or, I don't know, but I never really liked that friend of yours. There's something off about her. Over time, these insinuations accumulate. You start to doubt your own perceptions. You begin to distance yourself, justifying not wanting to go out, avoiding sharing moments of joy with others, all to prevent the discomfort and conflicts that follow. Controlling family members and partners use this type of manipulation to weaken the victim's sense of support network. After all, an isolated person is easier to dominate. Gabor Maté warns that living without genuine bonds in an environment where all your external relationships are questioned generates a psychological state of learned helplessness. You stop trusting others, and by extension, stop trusting yourself. Your world shrinks, your identity dissolves, and your body begins to react. This forced isolation is a slow-acting poison. The absence of nurturing relationships weakens the immune system, dysregulates well-being hormones, and creates fertile ground for anxiety, depression, and even more serious physical illnesses. Studies cited by Maté show that chronic loneliness has the same physiological impact as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. The body feels disconnection as a real danger, because in biological terms, being alone is a threat to survival. And the most ironic part? Sometimes those isolating you say they are protecting you. The narrative is always one of care. I just want what's best for you. There are a lot of fake people out there. But the truth is that the more isolated you are, the less strength you have to see the toxicity of the environment you live in. And that's exactly what they want, for you to depend solely on them for guidance, affection, and validation. However, living under this type of emotional siege generates more than loneliness. It generates constant fear, a state of permanent alert, a psychological battlefield where any movement is risky. In the next part, we will discuss how this ongoing climate of judgment and silent competition directly affects your body, and why emotionally hostile environments are as dangerous as physically abusive ones. There are environments where living is synonymous with defending oneself. You are not there to exist freely, but to survive in a minefield of evaluations, comparisons, and suffocating expectations. At home, this can manifest as parents who never praise without adding a criticism, siblings who turn everything into a competition, or partners who always seem to be waiting for you to fail. At work, it's the colleague who turns every task into a covert competition, the boss who scrutinizes every detail to find flaws, or the environment where the appearance of productivity matters more than well-being. Gabor Maté explains that such environments not only compromise emotional health, they literally program the body to live in a state of constant threat. The nervous system, faced with the possibility of judgment or humiliation, activates the stress axis as if confronted by a predator. However, in this case, the predator does not come from outside. It is present every day in everyday interactions, in sidelong glances, in loaded silences. The result? A body permanently on alert, unable to relax, to breathe deeply, to find internal rest. This continuous hostility destroys the sense of emotional security. You start to anticipate criticism, Shape your speech to avoid confrontation. Review every action to minimize risks. But this constant effort comes at a very high cost. Mental exhaustion, chronic muscle tension, recurring migraines, insomnia, and even sudden emotional collapses. The body responds as it can, but no one can live in survival mode forever without consequences. The most tragic part is that this climate of judgment disguises itself as normality. It is reinforced by phrases like, "It's just a joke," "You have to handle pressure," or "This is for your own good." Thus, the victim not only suffers, but is also led to believe that the problem is their sensitivity, when in fact, the environment is objectively toxic. And even if you try to adjust, seek acceptance, strive harder, be stronger, it doesn't matter. Because in this type of environment, it will never be enough. The system is rigged to keep you small, anxious, and vulnerable. And if one day you muster the courage to express your pain, that's when the final blow happens, emotional neglect disguised as normality. And that is exactly what we will talk about in the next part. There comes a moment when the accumulated pain can no longer fit inside the body. You take a deep breath, muster the courage, and finally decide to speak. Lower your guard. Show your vulnerability, your limits, your exhaustion. You expect, at the very least, to be heard. But instead, what you receive is silence. Or worse, a comment that changes the subject, a joke to lighten the mood, or even a veiled criticism that places the blame on you. This is the final blow. When you reach out and are ignored, something inside you breaks. This is the most devastating behavior of all, and Gabor Maté recognizes it as one of the main catalysts for psychosomatic illnesses. Because it's not just the fact of suffering that makes you sick. It's the denied suffering, the emotional abandonment in the face of explicit pain. The nervous system, already overloaded, collapses. The body begins to somatize what the mind has not been allowed to express. Unexplained pains, extreme fatigue, insomnia, palpitations, intestinal problems, anxiety attacks. The body speaks because no one else seems willing to listen. This final invalidation teaches something terrible, that your pain is inconvenient, that your emotions are bothersome, that you must swallow your tears, stay silent, keep smiling while bleeding inside. And thus, the most dangerous distance of all sets in, the distance from oneself. The person begins to live on autopilot, disconnected from their own truth, emotionally anesthetized, but with the body paying the price every day. And don't be fooled. This is not weakness. It's not drama. It's a human response to inhumane environments. What destroys us is not just what is done to us, but what we are forced to silence in order to continue being accepted. And the more you deny your pain to please others, the more the body needs to scream to protect you from yourself. The conclusion is as harsh as it is necessary. The body feels what the mind tries to ignore. And if you don't change the environment that makes you sick, it will demand payment, with interest. What's at stake here is not just your well-being, it's your health, your identity, your life. If this video helped you see patterns you were ignoring, write in the comments, "Now it makes sense." Your voice could be the spark that awakens others. Like, share, and subscribe, because here, we reveal what silence hides. And don't stop here. The next video is also important. Keep watching. You need to hear what comes next.